The call came on a Tuesday morning, right when I was pruning the roses in my backyard. My phone buzzed against the patio table and I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Mom. My daughter-in-law's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm at Riverside Park. I didn't know where else to go. I set down my garden shears. Are the kids with you? Yes. Don't move. I was in the car before she could say another word. I spotted them from the parking lot. My daughter-in-law was sitting on a bench near the fountain. My 6-year-old grandson pressed against her left side and my 4-year-old granddaughter asleep across her lap. There were 2 suitcases and a backpack on the ground. The kind of luggage you pack when someone gives you 20 minutes. I parked, walked to the bench, and sat down beside her. I didn't ask what happened yet. I could see what happened. Her eyes were red and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. My grandson looked up at me with that particular expression children get when they've been told to be brave but aren't sure they know how. Grandma, he said, when are we going home? I put my arm around him. You're coming to my home. How does that sound? He thought about it seriously the way 6-year-olds do. Do you still have the big TV? I do. Okay. I looked at my daughter-in-law over his head. She was watching me with an expression I recognized. The look of someone who has been strong for too long and is right at the edge of not being able to do it anymore. Tell me on the way, I said. Let's get the kids settled first. She nodded and stood up. I took the larger suitcase. Neither of us said anything else until we reached the car. Her name is Claire. She married my son Daniel 8 years ago in a small ceremony in Ashford, Connecticut, the town where Daniel grew up and where his father's family had lived for 3 generations. I liked Claire from the first time Daniel brought her home. She was steady and warm, and she made my son laugh in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. She was also, I could tell even then, a person who gave people the benefit of the doubt long past the point when she should have stopped. That quality had cost her. Daniel's mother, my ex-husband's second wife, the woman he married 4 years after our divorce, is named Patricia Vance. I want to be precise about who she is because the details matter. Patricia is 63 years old. She is from old Connecticut money. She sits on 3 charitable boards and is photographed at every hospital gala and symphony benefit in the county. She wears her silver hair like a crown, and she speaks in the careful, modulated tones of someone who learned very early that cruelty lands softer when it's delivered quietly. She never liked Claire. She never said so directly. Not in the beginning. It was smaller than that. A comment about Claire's apartment before the wedding. Cozy, in a tone that meant something else. A question about Claire's family background that went 1 generation too deep. A pattern of inviting Daniel to family dinners on dates she knew Claire had standing commitments, then expressing gentle confusion when Claire wasn't there. I watched all of this from a careful distance. My ex-husband and I had been civil since the divorce for Daniel's sake, but I was not part of that family's inner circle. I saw what I saw at holidays and the children's birthdays, and what I saw was a woman conducting a slow, patient campaign that most people around her were too polite or too comfortable to name. Daniel, to his credit and his misfortune, is a person who sees the best in people. It is one of the things I love most about him, and one of the things that made him vulnerable to someone like Patricia. He interpreted her undermining of Claire as awkwardness, her exclusions as oversight, her coldness as simply the way she was. He believed that if he was patient enough and kind enough, the 2 women he loved most would eventually find common ground. They never did. In the car, with the children watching a movie on the backseat screen and the volume turned low, Claire told me what had happened. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had been offered a promotion at the engineering firm where he worked. It meant relocating to their Chicago office. He was excited. It was a significant opportunity. He had talked to Claire about it and she had agreed, hesitantly, because she had built a life in Connecticut, her friendships and her routines and her part-time work at the elementary school, but she had agreed because that is the kind of person Claire is. Patricia had not agreed. She told Daniel that she was too old to have her grandchildren living across the country, Claire said, keeping her voice low. She said it would be different if I were from here, if I had family here who could help. But since I don't, she would have no support system. She said Chicago was Daniel's career talking, not what was best for the family. I kept my eyes on the road. What did Daniel say? He said he'd think about it. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then 2 weeks ago he started pulling away, not answering my calls as quickly, coming home distracted. I thought it was stress from the promotion decision. I kept asking him what was wrong and he kept saying nothing. Then last week he told me he wasn't going to take the promotion. Without discussing it with you. Without discussing it with you. Without discussing it with me. She pressed her lips together. I was upset. We argued. I said things were already feeling one-sided and this was another example of his mother's opinion carrying more weight than mine. He got defensive. He said I was being unfair to Patricia, that she had genuine concerns, that I never gave her a real chance. She stopped. Outside, the highway opened up into the long, flat stretch before my exit. Then 4 days ago, she continued, Patricia called and asked if the children and I could come to the house. She said she wanted to clear the air. I actually thought maybe she was going to make an effort. I got the kids dressed and I drove over and she sat us down in the living room and she told me, Claire's voice broke for just a moment. She steadied it. She told me that she had spoken with Daniel and that they both felt the marriage had run its course. That I was making Daniel unhappy. That it would be better for everyone, especially the children, if I stepped back gracefully. I turned into my neighborhood. The oak trees along my street were fully leafed out, throwing long shadows across the pavement. She said, stepped back gracefully. I repeated. She said she was giving me the opportunity to handle it with dignity. She said if I didn't, the process would be harder on the children. Then she called Daniel in from the other room. Claire's voice was completely flat now. He wouldn't look at me. Patricia did most of the talking. By the time I understood what was happening, there were 2 suitcases packed in the hallway. My suitcases. From my own house. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. In the back seat, my grandson had fallen asleep against his sister. Did Daniel say anything to you himself? I asked. Anything at all? Claire was silent for a long time. He said he was sorry, she said. That was it. I sat there for a moment with my hands still on the wheel. I am 64 years old. I have watched my share of human behavior. I know what grief looks like, and I know what shock looks like, and I know what it looks like when someone has been so thoroughly managed by another person that they can no longer locate their own thoughts in a room. That was what I had seen in Claire's face at the park, and apparently it was what she had seen in Daniel's. Come inside, I said. The kids need lunch and you need sleep. We'll figure the rest out. I did not tell her what I was already figuring. Patricia Vance had made a calculation. She had looked at the board and decided that Claire had no powerful pieces. Claire's parents were deceased. She had no family in Connecticut. She was part-time employed. She was, by Patricia's assessment, alone. Patricia did not know about me. Or rather, she knew I existed. She simply did not believe I was relevant. I am Daniel's mother, yes, but I am also the woman his father divorced, which in Patricia's framework made me peripheral. I was the inconvenient first chapter that the story had moved past. I was a woman living alone in a house in Fairfield County with a garden and a book club and, as far as Patricia could tell, nothing more consequential than that. What Patricia did not know, what I had never advertised. Because I learned long ago that the most useful kind of power is the kind people don't see coming. Is that for 22 years before I retired, I was the managing partner of a corporate litigation firm. I had tried cases in 6 states. I had a network of attorneys, investigators, and financial forensic specialists that I had spent 2 decades building. I had not used most of those contacts since my retirement 4 years ago, but contacts like that do not expire. They answered on the first call. While Claire slept that first afternoon and the children watched movies and ate the grilled cheese sandwiches I made them, I sat at my kitchen table and began making phone calls. The first was to Margaret, a family law attorney I had referred cases to for 15 years. I explained the situation. Margaret asked 3 precise questions and then told me what Claire's options were, in terms Claire would understand when I relayed them. Connecticut law on marital assets. Custody presumptions. What handled gracefully actually meant versus what it could mean with proper representation. The second call was to a man named Roy, who runs a private investigations firm out of Hartford. Roy and I go back 20 years. He is meticulous and discreet, and he has never once overstated what he could deliver. I told him what I needed. "How deep do you want to go?" he asked. "Deep enough," I said. The third call was to my accountant, a detail-oriented woman named Susan, who had also done financial work adjacent to several of my firm's cases over the years. I asked her a question about the kind of financial structures that appear in high-net-worth family situations when one party wants to control distribution of assets to adult children and their spouses. She understood immediately what I was asking. "Give me 48 hours," she said. I gave her 48 hours. In the meantime, I watched my grandchildren. My grandson Marcus had his grandfather's eyes and his mother's stubbornness. My granddaughter Lily was quieter, more observational. She had been watching the adults around her very carefully for the past 4 days, and she knew something was wrong in the way children know things, completely, without the words for it. On the second morning, she climbed up onto the kitchen stool while I was making oatmeal and looked at me with great seriousness. "Is Daddy okay?" she asked. "Your daddy loves you very much," I said. "I know." She considered this. "But is he okay?" I put a bowl of oatmeal in front of her with the brown sugar the way she liked it. "We're working on that," I said. Which was true. On the third day, Roy called back. I sat down at my kitchen table with a notepad and listened. By the time he finished, I had filled 4 pages. Patricia Vance was financially precise in ways that were interesting. She controlled a family trust, the Vance Family Trust, established by her late husband, from which Daniel received a quarterly distribution. The trust documents, which Roy had obtained through public filing records and some careful secondary sourcing, contained a morality clause that gave the trustee, Patricia, discretionary authority to modify distributions based on conduct she deemed contrary to family values. She had never invoked that clause before. But 18 months ago, she had quietly had the trust's legal documents reviewed and updated by a Stamford attorney. 18 months ago was approximately when Daniel had started mentioning the Chicago promotion as a possibility. Roy also found something else: the prior marriage. Daniel had been married briefly before Claire, a fact I knew, though Daniel never discussed it much. What I didn't know, and what Roy uncovered, was that the previous wife had left Ashford abruptly, that she had signed a settlement agreement with terms that included a non-disclosure clause, and that she had moved to Portland, Oregon, where she had been living quietly for 6 years. Her name was Joanna. I called Margaret back. "Can an NDA prevent someone from speaking to a private party?" I asked. "Not a journalist, not a court, just a private individual, informally." "In Connecticut, generally no," Margaret said. "NDAs restrict disclosure in specific contexts. They don't create a legal prohibition against having a conversation." "Good," I said. I found Joanna's number through Roy. I called on a Saturday morning and I told her, carefully and honestly, who I was and why I was calling. I told her I was not asking her to violate any agreement. I was not recording the call. I was simply a mother trying to understand a pattern. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Joanna said, "I wondered if this would ever happen." She talked for 40 minutes. I did not interrupt. I took notes, though I didn't need to. Every word she said was something I recognized, something I had already suspected, something that had been quietly assembling itself in the back of my mind since the moment Claire described being summoned to that living room. Patricia had done this before. The slow isolation, the redirection of Daniel's loyalties, the manufactured moment of clarity in which Daniel arrived, confused and passive, at a decision that Patricia had made for him months earlier. With Joanna, there had been a different texture of pressure. Financial, mostly, a systematic making clear that the marriage was economically unsustainable without Patricia's support, but the structure was identical. And when the marriage ended, the NDA had followed. "She's very careful," Joanna said. "She doesn't do anything you could point to. It's not one thing. It's just everything, all the time, until you can't remember what you thought before you met her." "I believe you," I said. "Is Daniel okay?" she asked. I always felt bad about Daniel. He's not a bad person. He just can't see her." "He's going to be okay," I said. "I'm working on it. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I am a precise person, and I think precision matters when you're describing how you handled something. I did not go to Patricia with accusations. I did not make a scene. I did not call Daniel and tell him what I had found, because Daniel in that state would have gone directly to Patricia, and we would have lost the element of surprise that was, at that point, our most valuable asset. What I did was build a file. Susan's financial analysis, completed and delivered on day 5, was thorough and damning in the way that financial analysis done by skilled people always is. Not through drama, but through precision. The trust structure Patricia controlled had provisions that appeared, on careful reading, to be designed not to protect assets, but to control behavior. Susan flagged 3 specific provisions for Margaret, who reviewed them and identified potential grounds for contesting the trust's administration. More importantly, Susan had traced something that Patricia had presumably believed was untraceable. Over the past 18 months, Patricia had made a series of transfers from the family trust to a subsidiary account, small amounts individually. Collectively, they added up to something that had a specific legal name. I won't detail every step of what followed. What I will say is that Margaret filed a motion on Claire's behalf that triggered a court-supervised review of the trust. The motion cited financial irregularities. It was specific and it was documented. It also, as a procedural matter, meant that Patricia could no longer use the trust as leverage over Daniel without that leverage becoming visible to a judge. The morning after the motion was filed, I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. He sounded exhausted. "I need you to come to my house," I said. "Just you. Today." A pause. "Mom, if this is about Claire?" "It's about you," I said. "Please come." He came that afternoon. I made coffee and I sat him down at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd sat with my notepad 5 days earlier. And I put the file in front of him. Not all of it. The parts that were his to know. I did not tell him what to feel. I did not tell him what to do. I showed him what I had found and I let him look at it for as long as he needed. He was quiet for a very long time. "The previous wife," he finally said. "Joanna." "Yes." Patricia told me Joanna was unstable. He said it without inflection. He was reading something in the file as he spoke. "I know." He turned a page. "How long have you known about the trust?" 5 days. He looked up. "You did all of this in 5 days?" "I've had 22 years of practice," I said. He looked back down at the file. I watched him reading and I thought about all the years of watching him grow up, watching him become the kind of man who trusted people, who believed in good faith, who walked through the world with an openness that was both his greatest quality and his greatest vulnerability. I thought about what it means to love someone enough to let them see the truth even when the truth is painful. He closed the file. "I need to talk to Claire," he said. "She's in the backyard with the kids," I said. He stood up and then stopped. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something past embarrassment, past remorse. Something that was just very clear and very open. "Mom," he said. "I'm sorry." "Go talk to your wife," I said. I stayed in the kitchen and I listened to the back door open and close. I listened to my grandson shout, "Daddy," in that pitch children reach when they're surprised by joy. I listened to a silence that was not empty. Then I got up and poured myself a second cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at my garden. The legal proceedings moved on their own timeline after that. Margaret handled everything. Patricia's attorney reached out within 2 weeks seeking a resolution to the trust review. The terms that came back were reasonable. Claire received a full accounting of marital assets. Daniel's trust distributions were restructured to remove Patricia's discretionary authority, and there was a formal legal acknowledgement that no outstanding claims existed against Claire. Patricia did not apologize. I did not expect her to. People like Patricia do not apologize because they do not believe they have done anything wrong. They believe they are protecting what is theirs and that anyone who got hurt simply stepped into the way. What she did do, about 6 weeks after the motion was filed, was withdraw from 3 of the 4 boards she sat on. The hospital gala that season listed her name in the program, but she did not attend. I heard this from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it without knowing its significance to me. I did not mention its significance either. I simply noted it and went back to my garden. Daniel and Claire did not take the Chicago promotion. They stayed in Connecticut in a different house, one that was theirs, with a mortgage in both their names and no complicated family strings attached. Marcus started 2nd grade that fall. Lily started kindergarten. On Sundays, they came to my house for lunch, the 4 of them, and we ate on the back patio under the oak tree, and the children chased each other through the rose bushes, and I watched my son look at his wife the way he used to look at her before all of this. And I thought about how long certain things take to repair and how worth it they are to repair. Claire asked me once, about 2 months after everything was settled, how I had known what to do so quickly. I thought about how to answer that honestly. I've seen this before, I said. Different names, different houses, the same architecture. She was quiet for a moment. Did you always know what Patricia was? I knew what she was capable of, I said. I didn't know she'd actually do it. I hoped I was wrong. I wish someone had warned me. I know. I put my hand over hers on the table. I should have been paying closer attention. That's on me. She shook her head. You fixed it. We fixed it, I said. You held everything together while I worked. Don't underestimate what that cost you. She didn't say anything. After a moment, she turned her hand over and held mine back. I'm telling this story because I want to say something to anyone who might be in the position Claire was in that Tuesday morning in the park. Anyone sitting on a bench with your children and your suitcases, trying to figure out how a life that was whole just a few weeks ago became something you're holding in pieces. It is not your fault that someone decided you were a problem to be managed. Predators, and that is the accurate word. I have spent a career learning what it means. Do not select their targets based on weakness. They select them based on trust. They find the people who believe in good faith because good faith is the quality they most need in order to operate. You were not naive. You were human. And here is the other thing I want you to know. That kind of person always believes their position is more secure than it is. They believe it because they have not been seriously challenged before. They look at the board and they see their pieces and they do not see yours because your pieces are quiet and they have not been moved yet. Move them. You don't have to do it loudly. You don't have to do it dramatically. You just have to do it with precision and patience and the absolute refusal to accept the terms someone else has written for your life. My grandchildren are in the backyard right now as I finish this. I can hear Lily counting to 10 for hide and seek, and Marcus trying to negotiate the rules in his favor. The oak tree is throwing long shadows across the grass. My roses are doing well this year. Better than last, which was a late frost year. Difficult for everything. Some things, if you take care of them, come back stronger. I believe that. I have seen it be true. I have thought a great deal about what allowed Patricia to do what she did, for as long as she did it. It wasn't cunning alone, though she had plenty of that. It wasn't money or social position, though those helped. What allowed it, what always allows it, in my experience, was the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention. That assumption is the real vulnerability in these situations. Not the victim's trust. Not the good faith person's willingness to believe the best. The predator's blind spot is the belief that their operation is invisible. That the careful, quiet work they do in private leaves no record, no trace, No one on the other side building a file with equal patience and equal precision. Patricia had spent years constructing a version of events in which she was the concerned mother, the devoted grandmother, the keeper of family stability. She had done it so consistently and for so long that she had come to believe it herself. That is what happens when a person mistakes the absence of consequences for the absence of accountability. The two are not the same thing. They are simply separated by time. What I want anyone watching this to understand is that intelligence without integrity eventually turns on itself. Patricia was a smart woman. She planned carefully. She moved slowly. She understood leverage, and she understood people's reluctance to make conflict visible. But intelligence deployed in the service of controlling other people does not build anything that lasts. It only borrows time, and the interest compounds. Claire sat on that bench in Riverside Park with her children and her suitcases because she had trusted people who did not deserve it and because she was, in that moment, without a visible path forward. That is a real and terrible place to be. But what I watched over the following weeks was something I want to name clearly. She did not fall apart. She was frightened, and she was exhausted, and she had every right to both. But she kept herself steady for those children, and she answered every question I asked her honestly, and she trusted me when I told her to wait. That steadiness, that refusal to collapse, even when collapse would have been completely understandable, is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the thing that made everything else possible. Resilience is not the absence of pain. It is the decision to keep functioning while you feel it. Claire made that decision every morning for 6 weeks, and I do not want the legal outcomes and the financial reckonings to overshadow that, because those things I could engineer. What she did, no one could do for her. And Daniel, I am his mother and I am not without bias, but I want to say this honestly. The hardest thing I witnessed in all of it was watching my son recognize what had been done to him, not by an enemy, by someone he loved. The grief of that recognition is its own category of pain, and there is no shortcut through it. He had to sit with it, and he did. That is its own form of courage. What actions we take consistently, and what we tolerate consistently, determines the shape of the life we end up living. Patricia had tolerated her own behavior for so long it no longer registered as behavior at all. It had become, to her, simply how things were. The correction that came was not punishment from any outside force. It was the natural result of a structure built on concealment, meeting people who were no longer willing to look away. I am 64 years old. I have seen a great many things resolve and a great many things not resolve. What I know is this: the quiet people, the steady people, the people who are easily underestimated. They are often the ones holding the most consequential cards. Patricia looked at Claire and saw someone without resources. She looked at me and saw a retired woman with a garden. She forgot to ask what I did before the garden. Don't let anyone's assessment of your pieces determine how you play them. And never ever mistake silence for surrender.